Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Juliette. How are you?
Hello there. I'm okay, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. We're set up. It seems to be working.
Good, good. A light. Maybe a light is
So
helpful.
we've just got
Yeah.
people. I think we're about on time. Just check the time. Yep, 6:30. So we've just got people still trickling through. So are you happy just to make a start, Juliette?
Absolutely, yeah. Sure.
So welcome to everyone that's starting to join us on the call. I can see a few names I recognise scrolling through the screen. So this is number 3 in a new series that we're doing. We're calling them Drawn in Conversation, where I have the pleasure and the privilege to talk to lovely people like Juliette. And so it's my privilege really to have Juliette with us today. So the context for this is the big draw, apart from the festival that we run, also runs a National Contemporary Art Prize. So we run something called the John Ruskin Prize and exhibition. We did our 5th edition last year up in Manchester, and Juliette was the first winner. We had 3 winners, and Juliette was the overall winner. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about that, but also linking it through to John Ruskin a little bit as well, but really focusing very much on Juliette, her work, her practice as an artist, and trying to thread out some of the questions that you perhaps put on the screen as we go through. I have found with previous ones here that they often scroll very quickly, and I don't always get to be able to put them all to the person I'm in conversation with, but I will do my absolute best to try and thread through as many of the questions as possible. So, Juliette, do you want to do a quick introduction to yourself?
Okay, sure. So I'm based in London. My name's Juliette Losq. I have a studio on Eel Pie Island in Twickenham. I graduated from the Royal Academy in 2010 and from Wimbledon College of Art in 2007. So I went straight through from BA to MA. And prior to that, I had studied English literature and history of art. So I think, and I'm from sort of just the outskirts of London. Went to school in Romford, um, and have lived in London all my life, really. So yeah.
And I think one of the things that, well, as you know, we had quite a big judging panel. We had a panel drawn from across different disciplines for the prize last year, really because it's an interdisciplinary prize. So we had entries, as Juliette knows, from all different sectors, and 2D, 3D, some digital, some video installations, etc. I think the judges were massively impressed, obviously, by all of the entries. I mean, just to say, it was incredibly competitive. Again, Juliette knows, I think we had about 3,000 different entries to go through, and we were only sadly able to shortlist 41 pieces in the end for the ultimate exhibition. So very competitive. I think the thing that really drew the judge's eye was, well, it was that attention to detail. Again, it's the hand to eye. Those are all very Ruskinian themes, so that was a good fit with the prize. But also, I think it was the theme. So I think the focus on very much liminal spaces, transformative, those sort of in between, those sort of waiting spaces that don't quite know what they're going to be yet, and seeing beauty in those as well, not just seeing them as derelict sites, and sometimes a bit unsettling. I think sometimes some of the work is beautiful, but you think, oh, is that a little bit creepy? I'm not quite sure. So it's we were really drawn to that. And then also, and I know this is something that Juliette will be talking about, the astonishing use of watercolor and ink and pencil and drawing, but I think we'll be threading out a little bit about watercolor as well. So should we kick off, Jim, just thinking about the focus, the themes of your work, and where that comes from, what your influences were, what it is that draws you to some of those spaces, and also, of course, growing up in Romford.
Sure. I mean, I think those are the kind of spaces that you notice, or I certainly notice, maybe when I'm traveling, maybe when I'm on a train and I look out the window and I think, okay, that looks interesting. What's that? There's sort of a structure there that I don't recognize. and those are the kind of places that I'm drawn to, that I feel like I want to explore, and they are the kind of places that I probably did explore when I was a child. Certainly where I was growing up, there weren't any sort of attractive parks at that time. I'm not saying there aren't now, but certainly at that point it was, you had the odd sort of recreation ground, but the places where you might have wanted to explore were certainly the sort of overgrown post-industrial structures, or sort of decommissioned railway structures, that kind of thing. And I think probably that's what led me to want to explore them in my work. I think the first series of photographs I took while I was at Wimbledon that inspired my work were of the Beaubach's canals, which are all around Bromley by Bow in East London. So it's one of the stops I would have passed through on the train, and I'd sort of looked out of the window and thought, okay, that looks really beautiful. I wonder where it is.
Yeah.
So I certainly spent quite a long time looking around there, and also Docklands before that got built up. So all of these places are subsequently, so the Beaubach's became the Olympic site years later, talking sort of 7 years later. And obviously Docklands, as we know, became the sort of financial centre that it is now. But when I was looking at it, it was still sort of semi-derelict wharves. Places that sort of looked like they were waiting for something to happen, as you say, and it's those kind of places that I'm really interested in. To me, they've got something, you're capturing a sort of a moment that's never going to be the same again, and it's not like you're trying to kind of nostalgically preserve that moment, but you're saying it's worth giving it a second glance, I think.
That people would normally just walk past, wouldn't they? Yeah. We all often in conversation, we will have conversations about artists who work in terms of looking at urban regeneration, urban decay, those sorts of things, and talk about liminal spaces. And earlier today, I wanted to actually look up the official in the dictionary, what does it say about liminal spaces? And it says transitional transformative spaces, the waiting spaces between one point in time and space and the next, which I thought was rather lovely, actually. And I think it does absolutely capture, for me, some of the essence of your work.
I think, it's that idea that lots of people look at ruins, and historically ruins have been an incredibly popular trope in art, but it's the fact that a modern ruin is something that is not going to be preserved. It can only be a very sort of temporary, fleeting thing, because somebody wants to develop land. So I think what sort of distinguishes what we talk about as being modern ruins from what we talk about as ruins of, say, the picturesque or romanticism, is the fact that we are not going to be preserving for posterity these structures. They're going to be demolished, turned into something completely different, or maybe if the structure is preserved, there's the sort of essence of what they were used for will be removed. They'll be sanitized in some way, I think.
So it's landscapes, but a contemporary landscape.
I think you can sort of draw beauty from nature, and you can find yourself in a landscape, and you could almost be sort of 200 years ago within that same landscape. But the only thing that kind of defines it as contemporary are what marks people have left on the land, and then how those marks have been changed again. So, for example, you might have a sort of Victorian factory structure or wharf structure. We don't know exactly what the workings of that were, unless we are a historian, but we can kind of speculate on it, and it is being probably used in a different way now. So, for example, it might be a den, it might be somewhere that graffiti artists use to tag, or it might be a wildlife, a place where wildlife would live, and it's those kind of relationships between what something was used for and what it is used for, and the sort of gap where we speculate what it may have been used for, and the reality of what it was used for. That's what I'm interested in within these.
It's so multi-layered. It's so much, and your studio as well is also interesting, isn't it? That's also in East London, and
it's in Twickenham.
Twickenham, sorry. It's a nature. I think there's also a nature reserve, isn't there? So there's that link between observing, you know, the surroundings, the link between man and nature and urban and rural and those sort of in between, sometimes forgotten spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. So where I am now, I'm in Twickenham on a place called Eel Pie Island, which is one of the very few working boat yards left on the Thames. And it is, part of it has been sort of allowed to turn into a wildlife sanctuary, a bird sanctuary. Then you've got the working boat yard section, and then you've got about something like 30 very, very small, in some cases, artist studios tucked away in sort of sheds or boats that have been converted, or purpose-built studios. It's quite quirky looking. But yeah, I mean, definitely that combination of industry and nature. Yeah. Although I've obviously been making that kind of work before I moved into this studio, I certainly think it probably has a sort of subliminal effect on the way that I work. And
yeah. I just saw a question pop up that I think it said, just before it pops off the screen, it said, have you ever been back to one of the spaces that you have worked with and then reappraised it and in some way wanted to revisit that? And I think the question was improve it or see it in a slightly different way.
In reality, I don't dare go back to these places because I think I'll be so disappointed if I go back to the Olympic site now. I mean, obviously you've still got the waterways there, but when I went there, it was so beautiful. It was just sort of covered in weed, sort of these amazing blooms on either side of it, but wild blooms, factories that have been disused for years that have just been left there as empty structures, and you know, full of wildlife. And I think now I would just be so disappointed that yes, okay, so you've still got some of the structures there, but actually I think it would have probably lost the quality that I really liked about it, which was that it was so quiet, and it was so kind of almost eerily quiet. I remember just wandering around there. I always sort of took someone with me, but you wouldn't see anybody, and you would just kind of come across these buildings and think, what on earth is that, and how is it still here? And there are some places I've found in other parts of London where you can still get to that quality. One of them is the River Wandle, which is around kind of Wandsworth area. Bizarrely, that's only just started being developed really, but you can still find some of these kind of quiet pockets. But no, I think I'd be too disappointed. Maybe one day, you know, 15 years time, when I think Ian Sinclair wrote something about that, you know, sort of the Millennium Dome. He started wandering around that area again and starting to find weeds growing up through the concrete, which he was quite pleased about. And I'm sure the same thing will happen with the Olympic site as well.
Yeah, I remember. I live in Walthamstow. I remember going around the Olympic Park. Gosh, probably about 2009 or 10, and they were taking people around, and it was just this enormous expanse. Things change so quickly. So going back again to one of the things, again, I think probably some of the people on the call might be interested to hear more about is your incredible use of watercolor. And I know that you have some stories to tell around that, and in terms of your the development of that and your process, the journey that you've had with that through school, universities, your various degrees, your studies, etc. It'd be great. Maybe tell us a bit more about that. And they're big. For anyone who's seen Juliette's work, they are big, large scale, multi-layered, often installation. You know, you just can't quite believe that they're watercolor. I think that's often first people's reaction. Certainly when we were at the Holding Gallery in Manchester last year for the Ruskin Prize, you could see at the private view, you could see people sort of going up to it and going, really? And you could see them sort of going in, and then they go, gosh, yes, you could actually see that process in their head.
Yeah, I mean, I often get asked if it's some kind of a print that I've made from a photograph and then kind of edited to look like a watercolour in some way. And I do like it when people do that, because they're really engaging with it, they're engaging with the process, they're sort of looking at the surface, and that's great. But how I ended up working with watercolour, I hadn't really used it at all before I went to Wimbledon to do my BA. So I was in the first year of my BA. I did an etching course, and I loved the process of making this etching plate. So you're sort of masking off areas, and then you're sort of etching into it to create a tone. So you're building up these tones through masking off areas. And I kind of thought, well, okay, it takes quite a long time to do an etching and I want to work a bit larger than that. So can I translate that process in some way? And I sort of started to use resist, and with resist you need to use a kind of a liquid paint with it. So I started just experimenting with watercolor and ink, and building up these tonal images, which are sort of alternate layers of resist and ink. And at the end of applying sort of 4 or 5 different layers of marks with resist and then inking over them, you kind of peel it off, and this image develops that does look a little bit like an etching. But obviously it's a one-off, it's not a multiple. And I started off just doing sort of black and white watercolor drawings and sort of adding ink for the sort of heavier tones, and then gradually as time went on I thought I'm going to sort of push myself, I'll start introducing colour, I'll start working on a larger scale, and it kind of just grew and grew and grew and grew, to the point where actually I now prefer working on a very large scale, partly because nobody expects you to be working with a watercolour on a very large scale like that, but also because it gives you the opportunity to experiment with how the image holds together as a figurative image, or how it kind of dissolves into these abstract marks that I've applied. So it's very much a kind of a process that draws on the etching process, but it's also a mark making process. And with the colourful ones, it's also it's drawing on the kind of painting techniques of the pre-Raphaelites, where you're layering colours or putting colours in juxtaposition to create your painted image. So it kind of draws on a lot of art historical images and techniques, really.
Yeah, there was a question I just jotted down. I didn't catch the whole thing, but somebody was asking around Gothic landscapes, Romantic, Victorian, pre-Raphaelite, and that the influence on your work with the landscapes for that.
Yeah, I mean, I do look at art historical references a lot, thinking of people whose work I enjoy looking at. Someone like John Atkinson Grimshaw, someone like Samuel Palmer. So Samuel Palmer did use watercolour. Atkinson Grimshaw used it as well, but also used oil. But it's the way they kind of, they are kind of Gothic. Atkinson Grimshaw is sort of a Gothic type imagery, but in an urban setting. So you're often kind of looking over the hedge in some part of London into somebody's lovely house, or you're kind of on a avenue of trees, sort of almost stalking somebody along the avenue of trees. They're quite sort of creepy, but at the same time beautiful. I think I can see the question as well.
Yeah, they
go fairly quick. Do you think your fascination with the derelict structures captured in your work and the romantic Gothic ruins of earlier romantic landscape paintings,
that's the one,
the generation of melancholy perhaps have lost past? I think I probably... So the romantic, I suppose it's the romantic movement visually. I do really love some of the romantic artists. So somebody like Caspar David Friedrich, but again, he's looking at things with a sort of a nostalgic, longing for times past. And I think whilst I'm kind of referencing some of the compositional devices that they use, for example, using the ruin as a sort of framing device or as the main subject of the work, I'm sort of not saying, okay, let's long for the Victorian times through looking at these post-industrial Victorian factories. I'm kind of saying, okay, this isn't going to last forever. Let's enjoy this moment. And sometimes I'm sort of saying, let's celebrate it as it is now. Let's actually just enjoy the fact that this is a kind of a haven for wildlife. It's a haven for nature. It's somewhere where we can escape some of the more, I would call them, anodyne architectural decisions that are made in some of our cities and towns. Let's avoid straight lines for a while. Let's avoid the colour elephant grey or whatever it is, elephant breath. Yeah, let's avoid that for a while.
Yeah.
Let's avoid Formica. And let's just kind of enjoy something that's a little bit more chaotic, really.
Yeah, no, for sure. Another question was asking about, I think it was when you were talking about etching, and in terms of aqua tinting, if you had, yeah, I think that was one of the questions, if you'd use that.
Yeah, so
practiced.
I did use that on this course that I did, and I do have ways of replicating the effect of aqua tinting with I use these tools that I've kind of made for myself, which are sort of secret tools, so I can't really share with you what they are, but through sort of fashioning these tools and using these tools, I can get some of those effects that you would get with etching and aqua tinting. So yeah, definitely. I mean, I love also looking at chromo lithographs, so some of the kind of illustrated fairy tales, for example, or illustrated children's books from the 19th century.
Yeah.
And the way that the colour is just slightly offset, so you've got kind of they look like painted drawings kind of thing, which I like the aesthetic of. So I do tend to look at a lot of printmaking. I just like it. I mean, I also look at contemporary painters as well as art historical references, but I think I really enjoy going to print exhibitions and yeah, just sort of, I suppose again, you're sort of looking at the image and thinking about the way it's been made, which I find interesting.
I'm just thinking also about your, I suppose your route through. It wasn't necessarily, it was a bit, wasn't it? It was a bit wide.
Yes, yeah.
It wasn't
A
to B to C to. I think I'm imagining that, you know, the viewers, I think they'd be quite interested to hear a bit more about your route through, and, you know, what sort of where you started and where it went. And I suppose also we've talked about this before about, well, I suppose what kids are encouraged and what they're not encouraged to do at school. But also maybe returning back to I'm just looking at some of my notes, returning back to this idea about watercolor. I suppose my question might be something about, are we having a renaissance of watercolor?
I mean, looking at the John Ruskin Prize, the lineup from last year, there were quite a few watercolors, and the second prize winner was a watercolorist. Yeah. So that's a big change. When I was at art school, nobody was using watercolor, and it was a bit of a joke, to be honest. I was called Watercolor Challenge.
Yeah. Sorry. What do you say again?
I was called Watercolor Challenge. But I mean, why was it a joke? I think because nobody else was doing it, so it must be unfashionable. And it was unfashionable. Obviously, historically, it's lower down on the hierarchy than oil painting. Yeah. When people were taught in academies, watercolor was just used for sort of sketching things out. It was done on plein air. You wouldn't have been using it in the studio. You would have been working up whatever you'd made outside in the studio. And also, it is associated with yeah. Process. Yeah. But more to the point, it was what sort of accomplished ladies were taught to painting. So it was more associated with sitting indoors and painting something on a small scale. So I think there is that association, and it's still associated with sort of I don't know, kind of coffee groups or something, and sort of amateur painting. And probably, I mean, the reason why people do use it is because it's non-toxic. It's kind of non-messy if you're using it at home. It's not going to kind of create fumes. So it's actually something that's accessible to everybody, but it's just not historically on a very big scale.
You're wanting just to very quickly capture something in the moment, you know, with a few marks, and just a quick splasher to get that essence of in the moment or outside or wherever you might be.
Absolutely.
You can just.
But certainly when I was at art school, it was just still associated. It was associated with the kind of sort of chocolate box imagery. So, I mean, before anybody had even kind of engaged with what I was painting, they were looking at what I was using, and it was dismissed. So I kind of think that made me want to use it all the more, really. And I was following my own path. I was working out this kind of technique that I've continued to use. So I wasn't really going to listen to people that said, you know, watercolor what, you know. It was definitely not a popular
take no notice.
No, exactly.
What do they do?
So I mean, I do use other media as well. I do use oil paint, but I use it very much in the same way as the watercolor. It's built up in layers, it's built up in glazes. It's
that layering again.
I think the layering technique, you know, even while using oil paint, I'm kind of looking at it as a tonal image that I'm then tinting, really, which is very much similar to the way that I'm using the watercolor. I'm using build up tone, and I'm introducing color within that process as well. I do think it has had a resurgence. I do think, I mean, I judged an art competition recently. I judged the studio award called the Chadwell Award, and I noticed that there were young artists coming out of the Royal College of Art, for example, that were using watercolor as part of their studio process, partly because they were in lockdown, so they were in their flat painting, and they just decided to experiment with something that wouldn't stink their flat out. And this particular artist was producing some lovely work, and they weren't sketches, they were going to be sort of standalone finished pieces, which is definitely something that I didn't encounter when I was at art school. So well, we could go into that, but it's a shame, really. You and I would both get our wrists slapped. We'd get ourselves in trouble if we didn't talk a bit more about the Guild of St George, I think. So wouldn't we? We're both companions. Excuse me. So maybe just to sort of thread into that, maybe Julia, are you happy just to talk through a little bit? What was it about the John Ruskin Prize that encouraged you to submit your work? I mean, obviously we had a theme, so for the people on the call, we had a theme at the big draw, which was Agent of Change. So we were quite keen to encourage quite challenging pieces of artwork. So they were, I suppose it was an invitation from us to artists to look at, I suppose we were expecting things around the economy, Brexit, climate change, political. And I think that's what we got. I mean, I remember we had about 50 Gretas for a start. I can't see who's on the call, but if there's any of the other judges on the call, they will know we had an awful lot of Gretas that came through. Yeah, but you know, it's what you expect. What was it? I mean, about the theme and the prize. It was the prize generally. I thought was an attractive prize to enter because it wasn't just a painting prize. It's painting, sculpture, craft. You know, it's this mixture of things. And I find that sometimes, because my work kind of hovers between drawing and painting and sculpture, that it doesn't necessarily, you know, something like that installation would not fit the bill for a painting prize, and it would not fit the bill for a drawing prize, and it wouldn't necessarily fit the bill for a sculpture prize, because it's kind of a combination of lots of different disciplines. So I thought, actually, you know, this is a good fit. In terms of the theme, I mean, the idea, I suppose, the idea that our attitude towards our environment is changing, and these spaces that I'm looking at are, as we've discussed, in this constant state of flux, and very kind of temporary. And I do kind of like this idea that I'm providing people, I'm kind of reinterpreting and representing these spaces that they'll never see, and I'm providing it as a space for reflection. So I thought that kind of fitted with the ethos of the theme that was set for that particular prize. But I think generally, thinking about John Ruskin and his ideals, it sort of fitted in with those as well.
No, for sure.
So
for sure. No, and we do hear that a lot, actually. I mean, we're a relatively young prize, if you like, because there's obviously a big prize scene out there, and I know that you have been pulling quite a few of those under your belt as well. Juliette, over the last year and a half. But they're, as you know, there's a sort of a circuit out there, and you know the artists all know it and sort of see each other.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a network there, isn't there? But I said, yeah, we did want to offer something different. There's no point in competing with all these other fantastic prizes out there. So that was very much in the thinking. We wanted to offer exactly that, something that was more polymathic, something that was very contemporary, you know, often quite challenging. And I mean, Juliette will know that some of the pieces in there were really quite challenging. And again, I'm not sure who's on the call. I did just see that Barbara's on the call though. So hello, Barbara was one of our wonderful judges. So Barbara Walker, brilliant artist.
Barbara.
Check her website out if you haven't seen Barbara's work before. But I think the Guild won't mind me saying that, you know, they've got a long history. You know, the Guild was, for those who don't know, the Guild of St George was founded in 1871 by John Ruskin. So John Ruskin, famous male Victorian polymath, art, social critic, but also very much, I would say, a pioneer in terms of thinking around climate change issues as well. And he has been, I think it's fair to say, reappraised. I mean, he is a man of his time. He's still a Victorian man. So there's always going to be issues that come with that in that context, but incredibly pioneering man for his time. And I think we wanted to sort of take the essence of some of that, this idea of slowing down, taking time to look at things, many of the issues that you, Juliette, explore in your work. And this whole idea, certainly the big draw of not just learning how to draw, but drawing to learn. And when you're looking at things, really seeing things, and we're looking at the detail in that, and taking the time to look at the detail and slow down and really take that in. So it's also implicitly that connection with nature and slowing down and better understanding the fragility of our environment and our world around it, and the importance of our connection with it. So we wanted to bring some of those things into the prize, and I think we did see that range really coming through. But
yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it.
You became a companion, didn't you, Juliette, of the Guild?
I did, which was lovely, to be invited to apply for that and to go up and meet all the other companions and sort of, I mean, there are so many different disciplines involved in the Guild of St George, sort of agricultural, sort of farmers or furniture makers or academic. So it's quite interesting to kind of chat to people that are coming at it from completely different disciplines, really, and to think about connections between their approaches and mine. I think certainly I don't think of myself in terms of conservation, but I suppose actually it's because the kind of spaces I'm looking at I know aren't going to last. So I know that they might be full of beautiful plants now, but in sort of 5 months' time they won't be.
Probably a lot.
But actually, I suppose kind of drawing people's attention to temporary spaces that they can temporarily enjoy, is fitting in with that ethos. And I think that is probably, if somebody sort of says, "Oh, where was that?" which frequently happens, where did you draw that imagery from? And I can direct them towards a site, and they want to go and visit it. It won't be the same as when I captured it or documented it. It may not exist anymore, but it may do. And I guess that is fitting into the idea of conservation as well, in a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for anybody who isn't familiar with the Guild, and I am biased. I mean, I think they're a fantastic charity. They are an educational charity, so all about really, so absolutely devoted to arts, crafts, as Juliette was saying, also the rural economy and the interconnection between that, and I think sustainable living, sustainable materials, and I suppose I am a bit of a Ruskin devotee, and I've seen some of the comments. I think Sumi was saying a few things, and yeah, absolutely, you know, people can maybe focus on a few of the flaws, but I think if you take the man as a whole, he was ahead of his time, and you have to take it sort of within the context. So I would encourage everyone to have a look at their website. Oh, sorry, that was a cat that doesn't even belong to me. Sorry, he's just, sorry everyone, he's just meowed at me. It's not even my cat. Hello, darling. Sorry about that, everyone. Look, you can see he's here.
Very beautiful, yeah. Your white cat, isn't it?
Yeah, he's not even mine. Okay, I feel a bit guilty now because you don't belong to me, do you? You shouldn't be here. So going back, you distracted me. So going back to what we were saying, so we talked about Ruskin. We've talked a bit about your route through. Do you find that? I mean, we obviously we've all been in lockdown, haven't we, recently? And certainly from my perspective and at the Big Draw, we have been hearing, and we develop a lot of content. We've been seeing that there's a lot more people seem to be engaging with art and drawing and online and creativity, but seeing it as a means to help their well-being and help them through perhaps a challenging time. And I think, again, that's probably quite close to some of the themes that we explore within the prize and indeed sorry that the guild explore. And I just wondered what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly noticed just through social media that many of my friends who aren't involved in art in any way are now engaging with art, albeit it could be through online exhibitions, online visits to the British Museum, but crafting. So I think people have felt a need either to express themselves or to distract themselves or to sort of comfort themselves through making, which is quite ironic, bearing in mind how I feel still little weight the arts are given within the education system. Certainly in terms of funding, in terms of the way they're sort of deprioritised within schools. So perhaps this could sort of mark a turning point in the way that the majority of people are thinking, which might then have a kick-on effect, one would hope, in terms of
I hope so too.
The way that, in terms of the way that those on high are thinking, because it's something that has been vital to people. It's been a lifeline to people. I have been doing some online teaching, which obviously it's not as rewarding as working closely with people demonstrating things. I don't think it can ever work quite as well, but nevertheless it's worked, and it's certainly provided enrichment activities, I think, which wouldn't have been there otherwise. If you were working in complete isolation with no feedback from anyone else, I think it would be very demoralising. At least, people are able to make things now, show them on Instagram, show them on any sort of channel, and it's like you're being seen, you're still being seen, even though people may not be seeing your work in person. So yes, I certainly think that I noticed that trend.
I mean, it's really, I mean, it's, to be honest, it's centering around a lot of the conversations that we're having with very much sort of Big Draw hat on, just moving away from John Ruskin in the prize for a minute, are exactly around those themes. Obviously our theme, because our theme, obviously, for people on the call who don't know, our theme for we have an international festival. This year is Big Green Draw, Climate of Change. So there's lots of conversations around sustainable living and eco and environmental and I suppose positive visual manifestations of change, so the placards and everything. But there is also a lot of interest around creativity for health and well-being, and particularly in these very challenging times that we've all found us in. And I think a desire, certainly from the communities that I'm in, and it's hard to, isn't it, because we're all in our own groups, their own bubbles, but certainly from the cultural community, that we hope, I mean, I've got 2 small kids, as Juliette knows, because they crash the calls all the time, and the cat does as well, who doesn't even belong to me. I do genuinely hope that some of this will be taken on board, and so that, when the kids go back to school and when education resumes, that some of these themes are considered, and the lack of parity with the STEM subjects, and that the arts and creative subjects do start to begin to be given more of the the recognition and the support that they deserve. And I mean, there's so much work going on around it, but it never quite seems to, you know, so we all
sort of go in cycles as well, doesn't it? It seems to be that sometimes there'll be a few years when there's an injection of interest and suddenly kind of art departments are given a bit more money, or people are encouraged to look at the arts for higher education, and then it seems to kind of go backwards, so that it becomes something that's done again. And we were sort of, I think we touched briefly on my kind of circuitous route, and the fact that when I was at school, it was very much considered a non-academic subject, and I was encouraged not to do it. In fact, I managed to eventually, I had a very good teacher at school. They couldn't fit me in within their timetable. I couldn't do it at school, so I did it at home with my dad. And this one teacher was so helpful and sort of did the art history element with me and sat down with me in her spare time and kind of taught me. And I'm still in touch with her. But very much art was not something I was encouraged to do. Talking about applying to art school, there were places that I wanted to apply to, and I was very much told, no, don't do it. You're sort of cutting off opportunities for yourself. So, you know, I listened. It wasn't, you know, it was the majority of people telling me this. So I ended up doing what were considered to be more academic subjects, and I ended up doing English literature and art history, which I did love, but I can't say that they haven't fed into the work that I make now, because they have. And I think they have added to the way that I think, the way that I make my work, the way that I bring in references. So it all happens for a reason. But I don't know that things have changed an awful lot. I still think that students are kind of probably urged away from applying to art school, probably even more so now because of the constant sort of weighing up of fees versus benefit, you know. So I think it's tougher now than it was even when I was a
that's right.
student.
I mean, the current administration, I think I mentioned this in the last one we did of these. Obviously, they've even produced tables and all sorts of data around this, sort of putting a monetary value on the value to the economy of the subject that you take, as if that's the only index of value, and how we measure value in our economy today. I think it's a very worrying trend, personally. I mean, like you, Juliette. I mean, I'm not the incredible artist you are, but I do draw, I do knit and sew and do all these things as well. I also was discouraged. I wanted to do A-level art, and even at A-level, I was told, no, don't do A-level art. That's not going to get you anywhere. Stick to your maths. And I did because I was told at that age, you know, you do your academic. If you're a good all-round, you do your academic subjects. And that's going to get you a lot further, that you're not going to get anywhere. And I think the thing is, I saw one of the comments on it, I think it was from Willie, who said, oh gosh, I've heard this in the last couple of calls. I don't just hear it in the last couple of calls, but I hear this literally every week. I hear it from every week almost, from different people, artists, designers, innovators, people working across the creative industries. And the story is so common, that they were discouraged from doing those creative subjects at school. And they took the advice, and then later they came back and they sort of threaded back in, and it's incredible. It's so common, and it's such a shame that even now
there's maybe something, maybe that is kind of the equivalent of character building. If you sort of had to fight your way to get back into it, maybe it kind of makes you more determined to, you know, carry on plugging away at it. I think it's challenging going to art school. So even if you do go to art school, it can be a challenging environment that you may or may not respond well to. You've got to be very thick-skinned. You've got to be determined, I think. But again, I know a lot of people that I went to BA with who are not working as artists, but they're definitely working in jobs where that experience has informed them, and it's kind of brought into play in their everyday job. I've got friends that are sort of valuers, auctioneers, working in advertising,
you
working
did
in
do
charity.
that for a bit, didn't you? That's what you you did for a while.
I worked in insurance, but not
yeah.
not in art insurance. I just worked in insurance. When I left, I did my MA in art history, and I kind of thought, what am I going to do? I'd quite like to work somewhere like Christie's or Sotheby's, naively thinking that kind of working in insurance might be a route into that, and quickly discovering that it wouldn't. But it did obviously provide the opportunity for me to go back and study. So I just saved up my money, did lots of courses at University of the Arts, weekend courses, sort of crash courses in portfolio preparation, and just kind of started to apply, build up my portfolio and apply. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed art school. I really enjoyed my BA. Just in terms of, I was very lucky at that point. Everybody got a studio, their own studio space in the second and third year. Even in the first year, yes, it was a big shared studio space, but you still got your own desk. You weren't hot desking. You had a wall and you had a table. Wimbledon at that point was just a very, very, I think, encouraging, nurturing environment. Lots of courses offered. Just great facilities, places where you can kind of make your own canvases, materials store, inductions to lots of other different processes. I just loved it. Yeah. So I didn't ever regret, from the day that I started my BA, I knew instantly that I was glad I had saved up all my money and invested it in doing that. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So even though it goes all windy, those experiences do still end up ultimately feeding in a positive way, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think I cannot say that I think my process is directly influenced by studying 18th century British and French art, which is what I did for my MA. I think that the references I bring in are directly influenced by studying literature and the way that you kind of bring in references in your critiquing of one book. Art historical references, for example, theatrical references, all of those kind of things where you're kind of working in a multidisciplinary way, I think do inform the way that I work now. Certainly looking at the processes, art historical processes, that's something that you do intensively, certainly at the Courtauld Institute. And those are things that I didn't it wasn't a conscious decision to bring them into my work, but I think it automatically happened. So yeah, that's great. But I don't think that making somebody make a decision at the age of 14 in terms of what subjects they're going to choose and then have to stick by that decision for the next 60 years or 50 years until retirement is the right. I think things can always be flexible. And I remember being told as well by you sort of couldn't win either way. I remember one art teacher at school, so I'd sort of done my art A-level at home and I was applying not to art school, and I'd sort of said it's something I'm thinking I might come back to, and this one art teacher just turned around and said to me, you'll never go back to it, that's it now. And I was like, okay, great, thanks for that, that's another encouraging. So yeah, I think it should never be the case that you close the door and that's it. I don't really think it doesn't happen in other countries. There are plenty of countries where you carry on studying lots of subjects for a lot longer, and then you kind of whittle it down a lot later in life, and it's not this kind of clear trajectory that's mapped out for you from such a young age. So yeah, that could change.
I'm looking at the time. I'm mindful because I just love talking to people and artists and creative people, and I could just talk all night. Oh, I've had a thing that says we've only got a maximum of 10 minutes. Otherwise, we can't share Instagram, and I get slapped wrists from the team. So
right, okay.
I was thinking. So some of the things I've scribbled down. I had something portfolio careers. Somebody was asking about portfolio careers. And I think that we certainly, that resonates with us. I think a lot of the artists that we know are also teaching, juggling their arts practice alongside teaching, or other jobs totally unrelated to the creative industries, just to make ends meet. And, 2, 3, 4 jobs even, just to, I mean, that's something that we see a lot. one of the things I mustn't forget to say is that you've also done a blog piece with us, haven't you, Juliette? So that's gone on our website live today, I believe. So that should be on our website today. So I think the team will be really starting to share that tomorrow. I think we wanted to do this first, and then, so again, if people wanted to find out a bit more in detail about Juliette's work, do check out our website and our blog. And I would say also sign up to Juliette's newsletter if you've got one, and sign up to our newsletter.
I don't have a newsletter, but I do have a contact form on my website. So my website is my name, so it's www.losq.co.uk.
Yeah.
And there is a form if you want to fill that in which case I sort of invite you to any future exhibitions that I'm in.
Yeah, I mean, basically, we would love you to all, if you're not already, please do follow Juliette, follow the Big Draw and the Ruskin Prize. Check out the Guild of St George as well. I know it has a slightly unusual sounding. Perhaps some people might think old-fashioned sounding name. Sorry, Guild. I love you very much, but sometimes people do think it sounds, but it's not. It's not. Check it out. So the websites for that would be the guildofstgeorge.org.uk. The Big Draw is just go to the Big Draw, and we're all over the place. And we've also got, obviously, we've got a dedicated Ruskin Prize, which is the ruskinprize.co.uk. Just on the Ruskin Prize, we're not doing an edition this year, and I think particularly with everything that's been happening, but we are looking to do one next year. We're just looking at the funding around that first. We need to obviously discuss with our partners, but please do keep in touch and watch this space on that. Is there anything else that you think we haven't covered, Juliette? I mean, I'm just looking at my notes. I think we've covered most of the things that we wanted to bring out between us, I think, haven't we?
Right. Were there any questions that popped up? Because I've still got the same one frozen on my screen, so I can't. I don't know if anybody else had any questions about.
Let me just see, because Sandra might have sent me some. Let me have a quick look. Tips. She's gone tips. Have you got any tips?
Okay.
Yeah.
Tips in terms of
tips for anything, I suppose. Tips, advice on your practice, tips, I suppose, materials, what you use, where to, not to do. I would say we've probably got a couple of minutes before we need to, otherwise I won't be able to.
I'm actually a great believer in you don't have to use the most expensive materials. So I would be quite happy, and I have for a number of years had the same old set of I do sometimes just use an old set of W.H. Smith watercolor tubes, but I also do have nice watercolors as well. And I also I use shellac-based ink, and I use it in a very dilute way. So everything I do is kind of built up very, very gradually. So even the darkest tones are built up over a long sort of period of time by layering up. And where I'm using colour, we sort of briefly touched on it, looking at sort of pre-Raphaelite painting techniques. I'm not using black or any kind of a dark brown to create the darker areas. I'm doing it through layering colours one on top of the other, or positioning colours next to each other to get a particular effect. Paper, there are some great places that I use frequently to buy my paper from. At the moment, my favoured place is Cornelison, which is that lovely old art shop in sort of Bloomsbury area, and I tend to just kind of buy everything from them now. Again, I'm still using materials that I won a prize a few years ago, which was a Winsor and Newton painting prize, and the prize was a really generous, actually, supply of art materials, which I'm still working my way through. The only thing I ran out of pretty quickly was the masking fluid. So, but yeah, I mean, I've been quite fortunate in that respect that, I mean, even watercolours, even, you know, comparatively cheaper than oil painting, you can still pay sort of £15 for a tiny 5ml tube. So
no, it all wraps
certainly.
Yeah, no, I'm sure we could talk all night.
Tips for material,
don't we? And you,
always the tip for applying to art school. Maybe tips for applying to art school would be, I think, don't make work to get into a particular art school. Make work that you're genuinely interested in and that you're invested in, and that will come across. Don't kind of follow trends, because trends change very quickly. So you could end up kind of shooting yourself in the foot by doing that. I think that covers
watercolor challenge. I think that's the phrase.
Yeah, watercolor challenge.
Fix your guns.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
Were there any other? I didn't know if there were any other questions that
There
came
may
in.
well
I've only.
be, but I mean, I think
Yeah.
Sandra's been jotting them down. I think we're going to have
Okay.
to go because if we go over
Yeah.
the 60 minutes, I can't save it to
No. Okay.
Instagram
Brilliant.
TV. So I think we should wrap it up. But I mean, I think what we've been thinking around in the team is if there's a desire, if people want to have a follow-up session, and I mean, I think me and Juliette could probably chatter on all night.
Yeah.
We can do another one. I mean, we'll just do a
Absolutely.
follow-up.
Yeah. Sorry if I didn't miss any questions there because I can't. I don't know why, but I
They
can
go
still
very
only see
quick.
the one.
It's not easy. It's not easy having a fluid chat, and I know it's not easy. I'm going to have to quickly wrap this up to get in the time.
Yep.
So I would say if Juliette wants to, if people want to, we can always do another one. If we call it a day now and say, Juliette, thank you so much. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, and thanks
Star,
everyone
as
for
always. We love you, and
thank you.
and I will speak to you soon. And we'll probably do another one.
Brilliant. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, everyone. Sorry to have to go, but otherwise we're going to miss it. Okay, then.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.